weeks. Delighted to say that former Ireland captain Keith Wood is here with me. Keith, how are you getting on?
I'm excellent, Will. Thank you. That all sounds perfectly perfect, doesn't it?
Almost too perfect in a World Cup year. But then again, 2019 didn't go Ireland's way. And I think the narrative at that point, Keith, was better not to peak too early in the year. Joe Schmidt has got this in hand and the form will pick up before the World Cup. This time round, it's a slightly different problem, but maybe a better problem, that Ireland are the form team in the world right now coming out of the Championship.
Yeah, I think the Championship went very well. I think the last 12 months have gone very well. If you flip back to 2019, the year before, we had been pretty phenomenal. But by the time we got into 2019 in itself, things started to unspool a little. I think the opposition coaches looked at how we played, targeted certain players, certain plays, put us under a huge amount of pressure that we hadn't been under previously. And I think we suffered for that as well. And we kind of looked, I won't say jaded, but our way of going through it was going through 6 or 7 phases and then being able to unpick a defence. We weren't getting to 2 phases. So we didn't seem to have a plan B. And I think we suffered for that quite heavily. This time around, it's a bit different, and I wouldn't like to totally lose the run on myself either. But, there seems to be an awful lot more going on. And because of that, there are more people taking control, more people taking ownership of decision-making at different times. Notwithstanding that, we were very, very nervous for a lot of the first half in particular. And it was a very strange atmosphere in the crowd because people were thinking, oh no, please don't let it happen. But, I don't think the team played anywhere near as well as they would have liked to have. But they got the win at the end.
Yeah, I mean, if we're to reflect on, say, the last 25 minutes, you would say that Ireland played very effective and very good rugby, and definitely wore England down once the 14 men started to become a bit of an issue for them, and continually they were willing to bash away at the blind side, which was very successful with the tries they scored in the second half. I'm with you on the atmosphere being a little bit nervy, and maybe that was brought by the way that England played in that first half as well, Keith. They seemed to win a few penalties along the way. There were some Irish errors that were in there along the way as well, and all of that, I guess, just gets the crowd thinking the Grand Slam is there to be taken, but there's always that worry that maybe this is a one-dud performance at the end of a championship. That seemed to hang over the first half a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. I think what has been forgotten by a lot is that there was a 6-day turnaround, and that makes a huge difference. It really does. So there was very little training done during the week. And even if you're off just a couple of percent, the passes that should go to hand don't go to hand. I mean, how often in the first half an hour did we see Tyke Furlong pull a ball back for there to be no one there, and just all those things were just slightly out. That happened a good few times. Passes were forced a little bit, which were sticking in the previous matches, and they didn't stick in this one. And so I found that a bit disconcerting, I have to say. England's way of playing is they're infinitely happier without the ball, so they're kicking the ball away immediately, and I think it almost was as if we had too much ball to play with. Normally we kind of work on scraps, but England just kick the ball down the field constantly. And I think we struggled a little bit trying to get our head around that as well. But again, when you move into the second period of the game, the control that Ireland put on different elements, the discipline at ruck time, because we were turned over an awful lot by quality play from Jack Willis in particular, but we had composure. For all the mistakes that were made, for the slightly frantic things of seeing Johnny Sexton going into contact 4 or 5 times in the first 20 minutes, for all of those things that we haven't seen for a while, we never seemed to panic. I mean, the crowd was more panicky than the guys on the field, and we kind of were going away at the end. That's what it looked like. We looked very comfortable. And even when they were attacking on the line, the sense of comfort in the defence was pretty stark.
I think some of the credit probably is to go to England as well, considering how poor they were, especially in the second half at Twickenham against France. When you've just come off the back of taking a record beating, it would have been easy for heads to go down, end of the campaign, not put in maybe the level of performance that we saw from England. But their line speed was up. They certainly came looking to make a point, I felt, at the Aviva at the weekend. And for Owen Farrell particularly, when it came to that little kick chase battle that went on through a lot of the first half, kicked the ball very, very well after coming back into the team at 10.
Look, I thought Farrell played well. He's been written off consistently in the British press, but he's a very fine player. He's a fine goal kicker, and he hasn't kicked at his best this season. He is able to orchestrate an awful lot of fast-moving plays in Saracens. It just hasn't really clicked into a philosophy with England for a period of time. And there's been chopping and changing constantly with their players. I mean, if you look at the Irish setup, we are 4 years into a cycle, or 3.5 years into a cycle, and they're used to the coach and they know what the coaches want of them. Eddie Jones only went, whatever it was, 15 weeks ago, but even in his last 3 or 4 years, it was like a turnstile of coaches that went in and out, and a turnstile of players. So there's been no level of consistency of style or standards that England have been trying to play with, and one of the few consistent elements has been Farrell. So look, I think he stood up to it pretty well. I thought some of the other players did. I thought Tuilagi did. I thought your man Ribbons that came on in the second row is just a bear of a man. So I think he could be someone to watch out for. I still think they're trying to find their way. I still think there's a few players coming back from injury. And I also think that they play well in World Cup, so I think they're going to be very difficult anyway. They have a much easier side of the draw. But there's a potential cracker of them playing Australia back against Eddie Jones again in a quarter-final. I think that seems a bit interesting.
And you got Eddie Jones already making comments, which is going to probably wind up the RFU, his former employers at this stage, where he's claimed over the last 24 hours, Keith, that the RFU potentially influenced Borthwick to put Marcus Smith in for the France game and to try and push Smith ahead of the World Cup, and then pushing Farrell out to either 12 or onto the bench. So, I mean, again, Eddie is stirring away even when he's in a different continent.
Pretty much all about Eddie. So,
Marcus Smith, though, is it a case now at this stage, when you see how well Farrell has played, and maybe, look, again, it's a case of keeping Tuilagi fit for the World Cup, that now at this point, because it's only a few weeks ago we were talking, Keith, about the idea of Ford maybe coming in and playing the Borthwick style at 10, and then they have a look at their options at 12. Does it seem now at this stage Marcus Smith is a long way away from the team? Because it would seem quite difficult to get back in when he doesn't have a competitive international fixture before the World Cup, even if his form at club level is good from now on.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Look, I think that's just a really interesting one, where you're going for someone you can build a team around, or you go for someone who is a maverick. I would have said Marcus Smith had both of those attributes. He can play more conservatively. He can do what is required. He kicks quite beautifully. He hasn't seemed to have had any space in this international window, and you know, he thrives at Premiership level, and maybe the gap on that is something that he needs to get used to, where he can pull, you know, the players around that he wants to. He's used to playing. I haven't had a chance to talk about this. He's used to playing with Dom Brandt at 8, Danny Kerr at 9, Esterhuizen at 12. So they play at a frantic pace with a lot more space, and he causes carnage in the Premiership. Dom Brandt hasn't been anywhere near as effective as he is in the Premiership at international rugby. He has no space. Normally he's able to be powerful and get over the gain line. He's been stopped on the gain line. There isn't that laser-like pass coming from his 9 out to him, and I don't know that Marcus Smith has had a huge amount of space to play with. They've been chopping a change at who's at 12. So his comfort blanket is gone, and he's playing at a higher level. So it's the requirement for him is to try and see if he can get his head around understanding the lack of space that's in international rugby over Premiership rugby.
Now, that's part of a much longer rugby conversation, which you can pick up now in podcast form in the OTB Rugby feed, wherever you pick up your podcasts.